Welcome, everyone. Great to see so many folks with us here today for I believe, our 85th episode of This Is CDR. This Is CDR is an online event series presented by OpenAir to contextualize carbon removal solutions currently being researched, developed, and deployed for policy proposals. OpenAir is seeking to advance really at every level of government here in the US, as well as in national and subnational jurisdictions globally. My name's Toby Bryce. I work on policy and market development with OpenAir based in Brooklyn, New York. If you haven't done so already, and I see a number of folks have, please say hello, introduce yourself in the chat, let us know where you're tuning in from, your affiliation if you would like, and make sure you direct that message to everyone and not just hosts and panelists so everyone can hear from you. Quick background on OpenAir. If you're not familiar with us, we're a distributed all-volunteer network dedicated to the responsible advancement of CDR. We're a global community. We work together on shared open source missions in the areas of policy, innovation, communications, and activist market development. We'll have a link in the chat to a join page where you can sign up to join our organization. We organize our projects on Discord, which is a communications tool like Slack. Here's a missions page from our website, just a sampling of, we have a few dozen active missions, again, in those 4 key areas, lots going on. So we'd love to have you be a part of what we're doing. One mission in particular that's quite active right now is the Massachusetts CDRLA, which is a state level CDR procurement bill. It's in a live bill in Massachusetts. It's advancing. We've had a couple committee hearings. The sponsor is the Senate Majority Leader in the state of Massachusetts, Senator Cindy Cream, who is amazing and very powerful. And we are very, very optimistic about the prospects for this bill. And in fact, we're holding a citizen lobbying session, training session today at 5 p.m. Eastern. We'll put a link to that in the chat. If you're able to join us, it will also be recorded, so you'll be able to watch it later if you can't join us. And if you do live in Massachusetts, please consider connecting with us, because we'd love to get as many citizen lobbyists on the ground as possible for this policy. Before we get started, as always, just a definition of terms. This is a definition of CDR from a great resource called the CDR Primer. Anthropogenic, purposeful human activity to remove CO2 from the atmosphere and durably store it in geological, terrestrial, or ocean reservoirs or in long-lived products. This is essentially the same definition that the IPCC uses, and we think it's a good one to work with. So really important to make sure that we are clearly defining CDR and what CDR is and does. 2 really important points whenever we talk about CDR is, number 1, to disambiguate it from quote-unquote CCS, which is capturing CO2 from a post-combustion emission source. Confusingly, this can either be CDR or a form of emissions reduction, depending on what that emission source is. Today, in fact, we're going to talk about biogenic CO2 emissions. And if you are capturing and removing those and securely storing those, that's CDR. If it's a fossil carbon emission and you capture and store that, that may or may not be a good climate solution from a techno-economic and socioeconomic and other considerations, but that is a form of emissions reduction. So that goes on the emissions reduction side of the ledger. So a really important distinction. Number 2, and critically, whenever we talk about CDR, it's important to call out from the rooftops that CDR, while it's an essential climate solution, is in no way, shape, or form any sort of substitute for rapid decarbonization. We need to reduce emissions as quickly and as completely as possible, full stop. It's 90+% of our climate work. If we don't do that work, the 10% piece of CDR that we need to do will have little impact, because we'll have too many, the warming will continue. So, we need to make sure that we're really focused, keep our eye on the ball on decarbonization. And then, CDR is for that last mile, for the hard to abate emissions that we're not able to eliminate or neutralize in a climate relevant timeframe. And then in the second half of the century, we're going to need CDR to start removing the trillions of tons, 2 trillion tons of anthropogenic CO2 likely to be in the atmosphere at that point. So we're already seeing our climate is becoming unsafe. So I think that we'll need to deploy CDR at a pretty massive scale in the second half of the century to kind of stabilize and restore our climate to a safer and healthier place. So those are our background notes on CDR. We're very excited for today's program. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Megha Raghavan, who is going to talk a bit about run of show, and then she's going to introduce today's speaker.
Hey everyone, I'm Megha. I am an OpenAir member based in London, and I work on policy and market development as well. As usual, we're going to start with a short presentation, and that will be followed by a few prepared questions, and then we will go into moderated audience Q&A. So if you have any questions for our presenter as we go through, please do type them into the Q&A box. Do note that that's separate from the chat function, so just make sure you find the correct one to help us organize that separately from the chat. The event will also be recorded, so we'll be posting that to OpenAir's YouTube channel and OpenAir's website, and we'll also be sending out the recording to everyone who registered. All right, this week we're very pleased to welcome Stockholm Exergi Head of Carbon Dioxide Removal, Erik Rylander, to present the company's approach to BECCS and discuss how the pathway can be sustainably scaled in Europe and beyond. Erik is the head of CDR at Stockholm Exergi, where he is responsible for establishing a business unit focused on deploying full-scale BECCS to mitigate climate change and deliver carbon removal services to companies and states, aiming for net zero emissions. Before that present role, Erik was the head of open district heating at Stockholm Exergi, where he and his team introduced a unique business model for large-scale heat recovery to Stockholm's district heating network, which has reduced the city's reliance on fossil fuels and gives corporations with excess energy an economic incentive to become part of the circular economy. In parallel, Rylander also held the role of head of Stockholm data parks at Stockholm Exergi, where he facilitated the attraction of data center investments to Stockholm and utilized their waste heat for the district heating system. This initiative has gained international recognition for its contribution to sustainability and climate positivity. Earlier in his career, Erik worked at Fortum Värme, where he held various managerial positions, including manager of customer engineering and system design, as well as manager of distribution, district heating, and district cooling. Erik completed his master's degree in chemical engineering from the KTH Royal Institute of Technology. So Erik, whenever you're ready, feel free to share your screen.
Thank you, and thank you for the introduction. So I will now start sharing my screen. Now, is that working all right for you? You see my screen now?
Yep.
Excellent. So thanks everybody for joining. I will start with a few words on Stockholm Exergi. Stockholm Exergi, we are a district heating and cooling provider in the Stockholm, the capital of Sweden, Stockholm area, where we provide heating and cooling to basically all the buildings inside the city of Stockholm, more than 95%, and also quite a bit of the buildings in the suburbs. In total, we deliver more than 10 terawatt hours of energy to our customers every year. We are also a company very much, we have worked as a company for a very long time with phasing out fossil fuels and becoming a really good alternative for our customers when they try to reach their climate targets. So already since 2020, we were 99% fossil fuel free in our production. Instead, the production is based on recovered or reused or renewable sources. I will come back to that a bit. And now in the next step, we are aiming at becoming Europe's largest supplier of CO2 removals with permanent storage. Something else you can also, I mean, in this work with becoming more sustainable and giving our customers a sustainable alternative for heating, we have also, as you can see in the graph here on the right-hand side of the picture, managed to decouple carbon footprint from growth, which is something we are quite proud of. So as a company, we are owned partially by the city of Stockholm to 50% and partially by private pension funds, 5 of them all European. So there is no majority owner in our company, but 2 equally strong owners, which has its advantages and other sides too. From a business perspective, we work today in 3 business areas, which is one is heating and cooling, another one is about power production and also providing services to the power grid owners when it comes to capacity and balancing services. We are also heavily involved in waste treatment as a company, and now we are looking to establish a 4th business area, which is carbon dioxide removal. So Stockholm and the city of Stockholm, I will tell you a bit about the platform on which we are now deploying BECCS, because I think it really matters. So Stockholm is a city of very many circular flows. And I will actually, to introduce this, I will show you a short movie, which comes here, I hope.
Preparing food, dinner time, your evening shower, and finally relaxing with your smartphone. As you go about your evening routine, you're part of the world's most advanced energy system, one that connects our integrated wastewater, refuse, heating and electricity systems to maximize the amount of energy that is recycled. In fact, you generate a lot of this energy yourself because Stockholm's entire district heating system is defined by recycling of energy. So how does this work? Let's start with wastewater. Hot water that you use, for example, when you have a shower or wash your hands, disappears down the drain. We take the remaining heat in this water and turn it into new district heating. Then there's excess heat. Stockholm's data centers and grocery store refrigeration units use large amounts of electricity for cooling, which generates excess heat. We capture this heat and reuse it. And lastly, sorted residual waste. With sorted waste, Stockholm Exergi takes care of residual waste that cannot or should not be recycled. In this process, we recycle energy and generate heat and electricity. We do this in combined heat and power plants, or CHP plants. Incineration of waste powers steam turbines that generate electricity, with steam then being used to heat water for district heating. A win-win situation. Electricity is supplied via the grid, and hot water is pumped into 3,000 kilometers of piping to your home. If recycled energy does not meet demand, we provide heat with the help of renewables. One way we do this is to harness the heat from seawater, warmed by the sun. We use this renewable energy for district heating. We also use residual products from the forestry sector, for example, wood chips, branches, and treetops. All these become renewable biofuel that we burn at our plants to produce district heating and electricity. This is how Stockholm's district heating system works. We generate district heating and electricity entirely from recycled energy or from renewables. All this makes it easy for you to be part of a solution, which is both resource efficient and good for the climate. If you want to learn more, please visit stockholmexergi.se.
So this was a short introduction to the platform for innovation, which is what we consider our district heating system to be. The district heating system in Stockholm is really extensive. It's 3,000 kilometers of pipes sitting underneath the ground, which allows us to transport energy from where it's in excess to where it can be used, including, obviously our own production, but also, as was mentioned here in the film, we collect waste heat from different places in the city. We actually buy this waste heat from the ones who can provide it to use it in the district heating system instead of producing energy from fuels that can otherwise be saved. So this is a very important platform that we are now starting from when we are implementing CDR or BECCS in Stockholm. Oops. Next slide. So Toby already gave you a short heads up on the difference between BECCS and CCS in the introduction. I was just thinking that I would emphasize that a bit with this slide. First of all, also to give you a reminder of how bioenergy works in general, because as you know, bioenergy is considered a zero emission technology. And that is what we see here on the left side in the slide, where trees, as they grow, will absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere over the photosynthesis. This carbon is then bound into the biomass. When we use residues from the forest industry and paper pulp industry in Sweden, we are not harvesting any woods in Sweden just to burn them for bioenergy. All the harvesting is done by hardwood products industries and paper and pulp, and we take what they are not using from what they have harvested. So that would be trees, branches, tops, bark, that stuff. That is what goes into the energy production process. And when we incinerate those residues in our plants, the same carbon that was once absorbed by the trees is released and normally emitted to the atmosphere again, so that this is a closed circle for the carbon. The same carbon that was once taken out of the atmosphere is released back into the atmosphere, hence a zero process. What we do when we do BECCS, BECCS standing for bioenergy carbon capture and storage, is that we still utilize the same process with the photosynthesis, the trees absorbing the carbon from the atmosphere. We are still using the same residues from forestry and paper and pulp. We are actually not taking any more biomass out of the woods just because we install the carbon capture technology. We're just using the same flows that are already being used. But now, instead of releasing the carbon upon incineration, we will capture the carbon and store the carbon dioxide geologically. And this needs to be kept separate from what you normally would talk about when you talk about CCS, which is normally about some kind of a process with a fossil raw material and normally fossil emissions to the atmosphere. But when applying CCS technology, you can avoid those emissions, or as Toby said, this would be a reduction of already present emissions that will go away when you implement CCS technology, whereas the BECCS technology creates a flow of carbon from the atmosphere to the geosphere. So the project that we are now planning to deploy is a BECCS facility that will remove 800,000 tons of CO2 from the atmosphere on a yearly basis. We can also do this in a very energy efficient manner because of the district heating system, because all the energy that we invest in this process as electricity used in the capture and liquefaction processes can be reused as heat at the end of the process. So we recover all the waste heat from the process, and this in the end sums up to that we are using actually more of the fuel energy going into the energy, the CHP, after we have installed the CCS equipment than we actually do today. So it is a very energy efficient process with practically no energy loss. We are using sustainable biomass, and there, as I said before, we will do no additional outtake from the forests just because we are implementing this technology. I will come back more to the biomass and what the criteria we have established for sourcing the biomass. In this process, the capture process, we have chosen the HPC technology, which is hot potassium carbonate. This is a very mild chemical, and one reason for choosing that chemical is that we are operating in the middle of a city, in the middle of Stockholm. So, for example, amine technology we consider less suitable in this case. Also, we have a fairly high concentration of CO2 in our flue gases, around 19%, which is beneficial if you want to use the HPC technology. HPC technology also gives you waste heat at a higher temperature level compared to the amine process, which is beneficial when you want to do a heat recovery, as we do to the district heating system. So that's another important advantage for us when it comes to the HPC technology. In addition to all this, we do in our company have 40 years of experience from operating HPC process, as we used to operate a town gas plant in Stockholm, in which we were raising the energy value of the produced fossil town gas by removing the CO2 from the gas before it was sent out to the city. So this was carbon capture and release at that time, but using the HPC process. All in all, we will capture around 90 to 95% of the carbon in the flue gases after we have implemented this technology. This project then is standing on 3 legs of funding. So first of all, already a few years ago, we were winners of a grant from the European Innovation Fund as one of 7 projects in the first round of that program, which is part of the Fit for 55 initiative within the EU. So that is 180 million euros, which is quite a lot, but still not very much compared to how much money we need over this 10-year period that the grant is for. So in addition to that grant, we do need market revenue from selling these negative emissions on the voluntary market, and that we are right now contracting those clients that will do the offtake, and we are trying to secure as much revenues as possible, but we don't expect to be able to reach financial close only based on revenues from the voluntary market and the Innovation Fund grant. So in addition to that, we will also apply for Swedish state aid, and there is a state aid scheme being developed as we speak. There is already 36 billion Swedish crowns in the state budget for this, which is equivalent to $3.6 billion. And that will be distributed to projects that apply and that show the highest cost efficiency. So there will be a competitive process where the projects will bid to the government to get this money. We have been working on this BECCS program for a long time. So already back in 2018, we started to look at the possibility to implement BECCS on this KVV8, which we call it CHP. You see it here. Yeah, you can actually, the plant is sitting up here, as you may see in the picture, and then this down here is the capture facility that we are planning to build, and the intermediate storage, and the key here where we can load the captured CO2 onto ships to take it to storage. So we started the project already in 2018, and we did a technical evaluation of different capture technologies that could be suitable for our plant. And in 2020, we built a pilot plant. So we have now, since 2020, run a pilot plant which is capturing around 1.5 tons of carbon dioxide a day from the flue gases of the plant. And when the full scale facility is in place, we will capture 140 tons per day. So it's a lot more per 140 tons per hour, actually, is it? And so it's a big difference between what we're doing in this pilot compared to what we'll do in the future. But still, this pilot allows us to evaluate and optimize the technology that we will then deploy in the full-scale plant. After having gotten promising results from the pilot, we decided to move into a FEED study in 2021. We contracted the British company Petrofac to do this for us. And they completed that at the end of, well, in the beginning of 2022, or in mid-2022, I would say. We have since started our detailed design, and we are now moving towards a FID, which will be in mid-24. We have also, in the meantime, submitted our environmental permit application to the Swedish courts, and we are looking to get a positive decision from that court in February. So far, it looks very good. If we are able to make the final investment decision in mid-24, which is obviously depending on several factors, for example, that the funding is working out, but it looks promising at this point, I would say, we will be able to commission and go live with this plant in 2027. So start delivering to our customers in 2027. So here's an illustration of the value chain that we are now establishing. So the first part here with the certified biomass is already in place. You see below here, you see the plant that is has been in operation since 2016. So this biomass, we collect this biomass in the Baltic Sea region, I should say. 65% of the biomass comes from Sweden, around 25% from the Baltic states, and the rest from other parts of Europe. So it's all European biomass with only very few exceptions. So this biomass is then incinerated with carbon capture and heat reuse. We will liquefy, after we have captured and separated the CO2 from the flue gas, we will liquefy the carbon dioxide and we will send it to a buffer storage from which we can load it to ships that will take it to the North Sea area, either on or offshore storage, but geological. And we have not yet chosen which project to store with because we simply want to follow them a bit longer before we make our final decision. There are several projects being developed at the same time, and this is obviously and also developed in parallel with our project. So we need to follow those a bit longer before we make up our mind who we believe will be the best bet for us. But this is also something that needs to converge for us before we make our final investment decision mid next year. Also in this picture, so the investments we are making ourselves would be the second and the third box here up here in the process. So we are investing in the capture plant, and we are investing in the liquefaction and the ability to load a ship, whereas transportation and geological storage is something we will buy as a service. All right, so doing this and addressing the market, we need to specify, we need to be able to specify the product that we are selling. And so we took the decision to develop our own methodology for what we consider sustainable BECCS. We were a bit inspired by Climeworks, who came up with a first draft methodology for DAC about a year ago. So now we did this development work together with Drax, which is one of the other leading suppliers of BECCS. We were helped out by Eco engineers, and we also had McKinsey on the team. So this methodology defines what is the net carbon removal unit, the CRU, that we will be selling, which is then based on BECCS from sustainable biomass and permanent storage. And this methodology has now been developed for a European environment first and foremost, but it works also outside, but it's very, very heavily relying on existing EU laws and regulation. Also because there is quite mature and a good regulation in the EU when it comes to biomass and biomass for energy. So what happens now is that we launched this methodology first at the New York Climate Week a few weeks ago, and then again in Europe during Carbon Unbound last week in London. This is still in a draft. It's the 0.9 version, and we are now waiting for DNV to do their verification that this methodology is in compliance with the ISO standards. And when they have given us a green light, this will be the 1.0 version that we will start using. We have also sent this methodology as an input to the ongoing development work within the EU for the CRCF, the Carbon Removal Certificate Framework, which is going to be law in Europe on what is a removal and what is not. So I think the most important part of this methodology, and what we have spent the most time on working with finding good solutions for, is how to define sustainable biomass, because BECCS cannot be sustainable and cannot be considered a good thing unless you are using truly sustainable biomass. And in this case, the foundation for the rules that we have set up for our sourcing is based on the RED 3, which is the Renewable Energy Directive within the EU, and specifically Article 29 within that regulation. And we have developed 4 key criteria that will guide our sourcing of BECCS under this biomass under this methodology. Well, I mean, this is quite a bit of text on this in the actual document, but to summarize, this is about that we can only source from areas where the carbon stock is maintained or increasing, meaning that we shall never. I mean, if forest starts to become a carbon emission source, then that is not a good way of doing forestry, and then it's not contributing to lowering the concentration of carbon in the atmosphere. So, under those circumstances, we cannot source any biomass from those forests, and this is evaluated on a jurisdictional level. So we are looking at Sweden, for example, as a whole. Can we source in Sweden? Yes, Sweden has a growing carbon stock in their forests, so we can do that. We can also never source from primary forests or any kind of protected areas in accordance to international regulation. there are only a few exceptions from that, and that is when when authorities have, in certain circumstances, pointed out that this we need to do in order to avoid wildfires, for example, and stuff like that. The biomass taken out of the forest for those purposes, we can also use. Just to leave that sitting on the ground would be stupid, or just to burn it in the forest instead of taking care of the energy would be stupid. So we do accept that kind of biomass also from those forests, but that's only after decisions from proper authorities. We are never sourcing any roundwood that could have been used higher up in the hierarchy, so to say. So everything, I mean, that we are always adhering to this cascading principle, meaning saying that whatever can be used for long-lived wood products shall be used for long-lived wood products. Whatever then can be used for pulp and paper, paper and pulp of that which is not used for long-lived wood products shall be used for paper and pulp. So only what cannot be used by any of those two industries is what comes through to us as biomass for energy production. And as I said before, that would be the branches, the tops, the bark. You see in the picture here on the right hand side what it can look like, what the biomass that we use. When it goes into our boiler, this is obviously made into wood chips before it goes into the boiler. The fourth criteria is about corruption index. So we are never sourcing from any countries, or rather like this. If countries are rated with a low corruption index, meaning that you cannot really trust the authorities, we are not sourcing from those countries unless we can do a very specific audit for the specific load of biomass. But normally we will never source from any countries with a corruption index lower than 50. So is there then a possibility to scale BECCS throughout Europe and the Nordics? And to start with the Nordics, there is a very good potential for BECCS. In Sweden only, we have about 30 million tons of biogenic CO2 already present in point sources spread out through the country. This would be energy facilities, bioenergy facilities, paper and pulp mills, and also waste incineration plants, which has a 50-50 rating, more or less. I mean, 50% fossil, 50% biogenic flue gases. Very good potential in Sweden. Also, the long-term estimated need of negative emissions in Sweden to reach a net zero position would be around 10 million tons after all the reductions have been done. So Sweden will, in the long term, be able to become a net exporter of negative emissions to other nations that maybe are not as good positioned. Looking to the east of Sweden, we have Finland, which has even more biogenic CO2 already in different point sources, up to 46 million tons. So also in Finland, this has there is a very good outlook to deploy BECCS. They are a little behind Sweden today, but I'm quite sure that they will also start this development process. If you broaden the view then and look at all of Europe, we find that there are more than 460 existing point sources with a total removal potential of 130 million tons of biogenic CO2 per year. Also, in the vicinity of those point sources, you find 380 district heating systems or networks, so that where the excess heat could potentially be used. District heating is not as common in the continental Europe as it is in the Nordics. In the Nordics, I would say that every city has a district heating system. In the continental Europe, as you may be aware, this is not as common, but a great potential when it comes to tackling climate change, as one of the biggest carbon emission sources in Europe is emissions from heating with gas. So if we could substitute gas heating with district heating, which is based on recovered heat from different industrial processes, this would be a very big advantage and a big step towards a better climate. But you should also notice that the plant that we are planning for is 800,000 tons per year of removed carbon, 0.8 million tons per year. The IPCC have concluded that by 2050, the world probably needs around 5 gigatons of removals per year to stay net zero. And if you just, kind of estimate that half of that could come from BECCS, that would be 2.5 gigatons. I think that even that may be tough, but say that half comes from BECCS. That would mean that from now until 2050, we need to get one of these plants, the same size as the one we are planning for, every second workday. Every second workday, a new plant needs to be built and commissioned between 2025 and 2050 in order to reach 2.5 gigaton from, if you are using units that are 0.0 megaton each. So that puts things in perspective. There is no time to wait if we want to be able to reach the net zero position in 2050 as the IPCC have depicted it. Okay, so to sum things up, I mean, obviously there is a good potential to do this in Europe, but in the end, there will be no BECCS without market demand. And market demand is both about countries wanting to achieve their climate targets, but also companies wanting to achieve their climate targets. And what we need to see is that companies and countries need to set targets already today and establish trajectories for how they would be implementing. First of all, just like we said in the introduction, the climate will be saved by reducing emissions, not by removing carbon from the atmosphere. Removing carbon from the atmosphere is just a complementary measure to be able to handle the very hard to abate emissions and also to potentially be able to work with historical emissions or too high concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere even in the future. But in order to reach those 5 gigatons of removals by 2050, we need to start now, because we need, especially for the permanent removals and the technical removals, this industry needs to be scaled, and that takes time. So we need companies to start demand these kind of instruments already today. And we all know that Science-Based Targets is a very important organization to establish this kind of demand and this kind of behavior, as more and more companies do adopt science-based target net zero goals. And in the end, to claim such a net zero position, as you know, you need to neutralize your residual emissions with permanent removals. But there will never be enough removals by 2050 if we are not starting to develop this already today. So this is extremely important, obviously. So we are one of the first projects, and at this point, as I said before, we are right now concluding these offtake agreements with different companies. The 800,000 tons we have today committed about half of that volume per year, yearly volume during the first 10 years of production to different companies, and we are looking to enter agreements on the rest of the volume too. So at this point, 10-year contracts to support this investment decision of ours in 2024, and payment will happen at delivery. Right, that was all I was planning to say during my presentation. So I now look forward to some questions.
That was excellent. Thank you so much. And congratulations on having sold half of your first 10 years of offtake. That is very impressive. Any buyers in the audience, we can provide you with Erik's contact info. So that was really great overview of BECCS, and very exciting about what you're building there in Stockholm. First of all, just to talk about your sustainable feedstock sourcing guidelines, I think they're super admirable, and it would be nice to see others adopt similar guidelines in the BECCS space. Is that something that you're committed to for this particular plant, or you're committed to it more generally? Like, can you talk a little bit about how you think about that? Are you looking to, use the systems that you're installing in Stockholm to, the rest of the European map that you showed, and potentially partner with other facilities in continental Europe or elsewhere?
Yeah. So first of all, the sourcing policy that we have established or that we are now communicating through this methodology, this is nothing unique for just this facility. We will do this in all the facilities in which we use woody biofuels or forest biofuels, forest biomass. And that is very much in line with how we have worked historically too. But this has been a process now where we have tried to establish rules together with, in this case, DRAX, and we have also been in discussion with others developing this methodology. So this is about trying to unify the market to find something that is, could become a market standard for sustainable BECCS. So yes, this is the way we see it, and this is what we believe is a good basis for high integrity BECCS. When it comes to implementing this throughout Europe, first of all, BECCS can be done from many different sources of biogenic material. You don't necessarily need to use forest biomass. And in our case, we are using forest biomass. This methodology is at this point limited to forest biomass, but we have built the methodologies such that the biomass is specified in an annex to the methodology, and we can just add new annexes, for example, for agricultural biomass or biogenic CO2 from biogas production or whatever. There could be so many sources for carbon to BECCS, and at this point the methodology only includes the forestry biomass, but going forward we look to develop other appendices that we could add to the methodology.
Speaking of the methodology, I put a link to it in the chat, and I encourage everyone to take a look at it. I think it's very well done. And it does accommodate DRAX, which uses dedicated cultivation of biomass, and BECCS Stockholm, that focuses on residues. I was a little confused by the chart that's on page 9, or the diagram on page 9 regarding systems boundary. In terms of the carbon accounting, there's this concept of what is BECCS specific and what is not BECCS specific in the life cycle emissions of the project, including either the cultivation or sourcing of the biomass. It seems like a potentially wobbly designation. Like, how does that work? How do you make that delineation between what is BECCS specific and what is not BECCS specific?
Yeah. So first of all, there is a distinction in the methodology. There are different paths you can choose when you define your project, so to say, within this methodology. So first of all, there is a difference between if you have a existing CHP, bio-CHP, or if you are building a bio-CHP at the same time as you're installing BECCS. So there can be BECCS implemented on a existing CHP, and there can be BECCS and the CHP built at the same time. Right?
CHP is
combined heat and power plant. So exactly. Sorry. So that is depending on where you are. In our case, we are retrofitting a carbon capture unit to an already existing bioenergy plant. It's our CHP. So that takes us down one track in the methodology when it comes to embedded emissions, in the plant and so on and so forth. And it also gives you a different situation when it comes to leakage, depending if the plant was already in place or if you are building a new plant, right? So we need to distinguish between those. Then when it comes to the upstream emissions from sourcing the biomass, in our case, first of all, that value chain is already in place. And Today, we are producing only power and heat from that biomass. So today, we are accounting for all the carbon emissions in the upstream to our heat product and our power product. I mean, we are still, accounting all that stuff and showing it to our customers. So what happens now is that when we implement CCS or the BECCS unit on our CHP, that unit will consume some of the electricity that we are today producing in the power plant. So that electricity is associated with a certain footprint, which comes from how we source the biomass. So when we send that electricity into the BECCS unit, that same footprint will follow to the CRUs.
Okay.
But not the rest, because the rest stays with the heat product and the power products that we are already selling. So I mean, all the full carbon footprint is accounted for in either the heat product or the power product or the CRUs, right? And so that goes for our process. I know that Drax, they are reasoning a bit differently, and they will put all the carbon footprint on the CRUs and nothing on the power. And why they do that, you have to ask them.
Yeah, and I will also say that I think that this question is much more, it seems like a greater potential concern with dedicated cultivation of biomass than the use of residues. And I feel like the way that you described doing it, that I feel like that works very well. I think I unfortunately only get one more question if we're splitting the time with the audience. I'm going to ask you about the very pioneering Swedish government public reverse auction procurement program. It's been very influential to us at OpenAir in terms of developing legislation for public procurement of CDR in the US. And so it's very exciting. I was a little, so would that sit on top of voluntary market purchases? Like, would you get both? How does that work? And then we have a very thorny question that you will enjoy in the audience Q&A about national versus corporate claims, but I'm going to leave that one to that. So let's talk specifically about
those two are very related. And the fact is that the Swedish the scheme for this reversed auction and how it will work and everything. This is still under development, and there have been some publications from the Swedish energy authorities on how this will work and how the accounting shall be and everything. That has not been politically decided yet. Note that it has not been decided, and it's kind of strange that they are communicating in the way that they have done. Anyways, we are working for a system in which corporates and nations work side by side to maximize the funding in projects like ours. We don't think that will happen if the government purchases CRU. The government shall support the private market to enter, to buy. So I mean, if the government money should go into subsidizing the private market so that they don't have to pay the full price, but also when they do that, we see nothing strange with that. A negative emission is accounted for first by the company that has bought the CRU, and then it will also be in the climate accounting of the country in which this activity happened, and that is in an analogy with how accounting has always worked. That countries, they don't have any emissions of their own; they have emissions from activities that happen on their territory, and countries will always aggregate what happens on their territory. So if Stockholm Exergi has an emission from our process, we will report that and account for that, and the same emission will appear again in the Swedish inventory. So that is a double counting, right? Always very natural in two different systems, because one is the corporate system and one is the national systems. So that we think there is no reason to do it differently when it comes to negative emissions. So countries and states shall not purchase these negative emissions in order to reach their targets. They shall use the legislative power to force companies in a direction that will help the countries to reach their climate targets.
Okay.
Companies are not part of the Paris Agreement. Countries are.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I'm gonna switch over to Megan now for audience questions. I'm gonna put a very confusing blog post from Robert Hoagland on this particular topic. He has a grid there to explain his thinking on this. But just one point of clarification. So you're saying that the BECCS, Swedish Public Procurement Reverse Auction Program, will supplement the voluntary market. It won't be a separate customer than the voluntary market.
It will not be a procurement program, we hope. It will be a
it'll be more like 45Q
program. Exactly. So I mean, it's a bit different because the 45Q is much easier to understand, much easier to predict what happens.
Yeah.
Whereas this is some kind of a competitive process, but very, very like what has happened in Denmark. Maybe you saw that the deal that Microsoft did with Ørsted, which is subsidized by the Danish government. Exactly that is what we want to see in Sweden.
Okay. It's all very complicated. I will put that post in the chat, and I'm going to hand it over to Megan now to close things out and ask some few audience questions. But thank you, Erik.
Great. Yeah, I think one is kind of related to what you've been speaking about, but you mentioned that Stockholm can become a net exporter of, carbon removals or carbon credits. So can you just talk about that difference between the accounting claims from a corporate versus a national perspective? So if Stockholm Exergi were to sell a CDR credit to a US buyer, is that sort of moved from Stockholm's NDCs into the US, or how does that work?
Yeah, so first of all, I mean, we think of this as two separate systems. So the national system and the corporate system. And when a carbon credit is produced, that CRU is sold to a company. That company can be domiciled wherever. But it can never be, I mean, this CRU can only be counted by one company. The company may sell it, but then they cannot count it anymore, and then someone else will count it, another company. A company will never trade with a country. So this CRU will stay in the corporate world, so to say. But at the same time, as this CRU has been produced in Sweden, in our case, Sweden will count this as a negative emission towards their own Swedish climate targets. If Sweden would, for some reason, decide to let some other country count it, then there will need to be a corresponding adjustment in accordance to Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. This will not happen in the near time because Sweden is not planning on selling any negative emissions to other countries at this point. But note that this is all in the environment of a voluntary market, because as soon as this turns into a compliance market, we probably need to see that the carbon or that the corporate credit and the national right to count will follow one another. In this, as long as the carbon market is voluntary, it doesn't matter if a company in the US buys a Swedish voluntary credit, because the Swedish government will still be able to count it, because the American company will not be allowed to tell the American government that you can count this towards American climate targets. The American company can use it for their climate accounting. So a strict separation between what is companies and what is nations. So that is the whole idea that we are supporting. We call it co-claiming, and it goes for the voluntary market. When we will move into compliance markets later on, we need to make sure that there is no misunderstandings, but we think that there are mechanisms that can be used so that this system can work also in that environment.
Okay, got it. Just on your methodology, could you talk a little bit about the idea of buffer pools? So this person mentioned that they read the methodology and there isn't a consideration made for buffer pools or insurance buffers, while other storage partners are held liable for reversals and need to sort of account for that within the EU ETS. So can you just talk through the decision within your methodology, and if there's any concerns that might be an issue in the market acceptance of it?
Yeah, so our methodology does not include a buffer pool. And the reason for that is, first of all, that we have come to this conclusion in dialogue with our leading buyers, that when it comes to geological storage, there is enough scientific evidence that this will be permanent, that a buffer pool is not needed. it's very different if you are doing afforestation or something like that. But when it comes to science, shows that after 1,000 years, more than 99.9% will still be where we put it. So with that in mind, and we believe in science, there is no need for a buffer pool. Also, the buffer pool is there to keep incentives right. In the EU, a emission from a storage would always end up under the ETS scheme. So that means that any storage provider who has a reversal will need to buy EUAs, emission rights. So those cost around 100 euros per ton. So there would be an enormous economic incentive on the storage providers to make sure that the carbon stays in the ground.
Okay, got it. And I think probably one last one before we go. We're almost out of time, but can you just talk about the principles and the measures you put in place to verify sustainable biomass sourcing? So how do you ensure that there's going to be, that it truly is sustainable, but also that you can continue to source enough sustainable biomass as, the business grows and demand grows for that?
So for sure, I mean, the numbers that IPCC present when it comes to we need 5 million tons of removals by 2050, I don't believe that could be only BECCS. I don't believe 2.5 gigatons can be only BECCS either. It's probably is something different. BECCS is a good solution in certain geographies and for certain feedstocks. I mean, in Sweden, we do have this large forest industry, which leaves a lot of residues behind that we can use for this process. We are keeping track of carbon stocks over available the data from the authorities, basically, like on how do the carbon stocks develop. And in this methodology, we are using average values for the last 5 years. And if those average values for the last 5 years of development of the carbon stock shows that the carbon stock is growing or constant, then we can source from that country. If it shows that this is not the case, we cannot source from that country. So in Sweden, this looks stable. In other countries, we are approaching a situation where we will not be able to source from those countries. When it comes to the ability for us to find sustainable biomass in the future, it is also different in different geographies and different countries. In Sweden today, we are only utilizing, a fraction of the residues that comes from forestry, because much of it is still left in the forests. So there is big potential to utilize more of these residues in Sweden. When it comes to other countries, it may be different. So this is something we are evaluating, obviously, all the time. But I do think that there may be a constraint going forward when it comes to the access to biomass if we want to scale BECCS massively throughout Europe and the rest of the world.
Definitely. That's a great answer. Thanks so much for being with us today. Erik, that's been really great. And for everyone watching, I think we are off next week. We should be back 2 weeks from now. Toby's put some information in the chat, but we are switching registration systems from Eventbrite to Luma, so keep an eye out for that. If you're on our email list, we'll also be sending something out probably that way. And yeah, again, thanks so much, Erik, and see the rest of you all next time.